We're now joined by the Treasurer of the great state of New Jersey, Elizabeth Maher Muoio, who she has to make sure that we have enough money in the state to spend on the most pressing needs. Treasurer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I got to get this out of the way. We had Assembly Republican leader John Bramnick on recently who said, they're loaded. They've got so much money in the state budget. You know, I mean, it's a good time to be the governor with all the federal money coming in and the et cetera, et cetera. The economy's not as bad as anyone thought. Is it that rosy, Treasurer?
I don't think if you were to ask every New Jerseyan, they'd have quite as rosy a picture. This was clearly a economic crisis that hit those in New Jersey that are at the lower end of the pay scale, those who are already struggling the most in New Jersey. And that's one of the reasons to the Assemblyman's point that our revenues ended up not taking the hit that everybody predicted they would, because those at the high end of the wage scale did, recovered much quicker than those that were not. I mean, our hospitality and service industries took a tremendous hit. And because the higher end of the income did fine in the end, our revenues weren't as affected as we thought. They also, our sales tax numbers did better than expected because those high income earners had money in their pockets. And the stimulus payments that we've seen over the past year have had a big role in helping keep those revenue numbers up. But there are a lot of people still struggling. We still have double the unemployment rate in the state that we had going into the pandemic. So there are a lot of people struggling, and that's what this budget is aiming to help with.
Treasurer, talk to us about the, say, 3 top priorities in the governor's budget. And by the way, we'll have the Senate President on, Steve Sweeney, and also the chair of the Senate Budget Committee, Senator Paul Sarlo, talking about this as well as Republicans who have a different perspective. The top 3 priorities in the governor's budget in terms of not only what the program is, but more specifically, who and what it's targeted for.
I think the top 3 priorities of this budget first are to help the people who have struggled most through this, not only through this pandemic, but the people that were struggling prior to the pandemic, but this pandemic kind of laid bare what those disparities were and showed us where we really have concerns that need to be addressed in the state. The second is to make sure our businesses that have really taken a hit during this pandemic also can get back on their feet and invest in them. The third is to make the state more resilient fiscally going forward, making that full pension payment, which has not been an easy point to get to, but trying to do some debt avoidance by doing pay-go on some of our big projects and wind in particular going forward. So trying to get our state on firmer fiscal footing going forward.
Let's talk a little bit more about the pension contribution. The numbers can get very confusing for people as we, quote, get into the weeds. Please, Treasurer, talk to us about what the pension crisis has been over a long period of time, the public employee pension crisis, what is owed, what's being paid on that debt, and why it's so important for this budget to dedicate so much money to paying down on that debt. I know it's a loaded question, but the average person who is not a state employee might say, well, what does this have to do with me? Please.
Well, first of all, you mentioned public employees. They have been meeting their obligations through the years. They've
been making their contributions.
Yep. Every paycheck, they make their deposit, and they've been doing what they're supposed to do. Unfortunately, government, in particular state government, has not been living up to its obligations to the pension fund. For decades, both parties to blame. But that has been when in times in trying fiscal times, that has been the payment that has either been shortened below what it should be, which is considered the actuarially determined contribution, what we need to pay every year to make sure that people who are retiring, that their obligations, that we meet our obligations to them. So for years, that has been sort of where the state has gone to meet other needs. Well, we'll pay the pension later. Oh, we'll pay a little less than we owe, and we'll make it up later. We'll make it up later. Well,
what was the problem with kicking? I'm sorry for interrupting. The problem with, quote, kicking the can down the road year after year after year on making the state's pension contribution, why does that affect all of us?
well, here's some numbers for you. The last time that the state made its full pension payment, what they owed in order to be 100%, funded for that year, was in 1996. And at that point, the payment was $228 million with an M. If we had kept doing that every year, if the state had continued to meet its obligations, our payment for this year, to make sure we were meeting our obligation, would have been approximately $800 million with an M. Instead, to get to 100, because those payments weren't made or were too little over the years, what we're going to have to pay this year in our budget to meet our 100% obligation is $6.4 billion with a B. So the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that have had to go towards making up for those shortfalls those are all dollars that we could have spent on so many other worthwhile programs for New Jerseyans. So that's why we should all care about it. So we're making that pension payment. The Murphy administration over the past 4 years, this will total $18 billion we've had to pay into the pension system.
Yeah, sooner or later that bill comes due.
Yeah.
Let me try this. Virtually every credible survey that I've looked at, including the research done by the Business and Industry Association, a little more than 30% of small businesses have closed in the past year. In your view, the governor has, and again, we look forward to having the governor on in a one-on-one half-hour interview. We'll continue to try to book that interview. He could speak for himself. But what do you believe state government, quote, owes small businesses in this state? A, those who have gone out of business, but B, those who are hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, no question. Small businesses have taken a major hit in New Jersey and across the country through this pandemic and through no fault of their own. This budget invests hundreds of millions to help small businesses and multi-departmental. We've got the Main Street Recovery Program, which is going to help with grants and loans and loan guarantees and tech assistance for small business. 40% of that set aside for women and minority-owned businesses who have been hurt most during the pandemic. There's a Premier Lender and Micro Business Program. There's permit modernization funds. There's a lot of money invested in this budget for small business. A lot of the money that we received from the Coronavirus Relief Fund last year, the $2.4 billion that the state received, a lot of money went to both small businesses and educational institutions. So, and we're going to receive a lot of money in with the new bill, the Pandemic Rescue Fund.
The $1.9 trillion.
American Rescue Fund, yes.
Yep.
And we're looking now at ways, we're working with the U.S. Treasury and with the guidances for that, but a lot of our resources are directed towards programs that will help businesses get back on their feet.
As always, Treasurer, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to having that in-depth interview with Governor Murphy on these and other issues. Treasurer, all the best to you and your family, and thank you for joining us.
Same to you, Steve. Thank you.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
State of Affairs with Steve Adubato is a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by RWJ Barnabas Health, New Jersey Sharing Network, Summit Health, IBEW Local 102, the Adler Aphasia Center, the Russell Berry Foundation, Operating Engineers Local 825, NJM Insurance Group, Georgian Court University. And by these public-spirited organizations, individuals, and associations committed to informing New Jersey citizens about the important issues facing the Garden State. And by Employers Association of New Jersey. Promotional support provided by New Jersey Globe. And by NorthJersey.com and Local IQ, part of the USA Today network.
I could feel my lungs fill with oxygen, and I got my life back.
The Sharing Network means to me hope, life, and everything.
The sharing network was a lifeline to me when I really needed it.
We are an organ procurement organization.
The core purpose of the New Jersey Sharing Network is to save and enhance lives.
To honor those who gave.
Pay tribute to those who received.
Offer hope to those who continue to wait.
And remember the lives lost while waiting.
For the gift of life.